one of the main things that we're using for this project is acrylic gloss varnish or medium. Now you can buy this at most art supply store. Um, Lately, I've been ordering things through a place called Nasco, and I can put a link on our Facebook page to the company. They're a local company here in Wisconsin, and I've found that if you're using a lot of Mod Podge or different types of medium, matte medium, gloss medium, and things like that, the prices are really, really, really cheap compared to other places like Dick Blick, Utrecht, and places like that. So, like I say, this is just an acrylic gloss medium and varnish. It has a really plastic feel to it. So that's one of the main ingredients that we're going to be using. Now you can also use a foam brush. That's to apply the acrylic gloss medium to the paper that we're going to be using. I typically use a brush. I just find it works a little bit better, and I have a little bit more control over it. And so now another thing that we're going to be using is scissors. I typically use a wide variety of scissors, especially when I'm cutting out smaller things out of magazines and things. Here's just a regular pair of Fiskars scissors that I use. I use these quite a bit. They're really good for cutting out larger shapes with squares, rectangles, and whatever. The other pair that I use is these are Fiskars also, but they're soft grip, but they're really, really good for cutting out detailed work. So I use those, and in some cases I may use a razor. If you want to, some people are really good at using this sort of like a knife and cutting out more detailed areas. But personally, I prefer using these, using just the scissors. Now, another thing that we're using is discarded magazines. Now, these can be any magazine, really. I typically go to secondhand stores, Goodwills, and places like that, and I'm always in search of Life magazines, from the 50s, 60s, because I really like and enjoy that particular style of graphic design and the photography and everything. So, but feel free to use, really any magazine will work. So you want to get quite a variety of magazines. And another thing that we're using, we're going to be using an iron, just a regular iron. This is going to fuse our medium together. One of the main things that we're using, this is a backing material for labels. Now, this particular backing material for labels is for address labels. So you can pick up a pack of these address labels. At most any department store has them. This is Avery. If you have CD labels, anything that's going to hold a self-adhesive label too works great. Now, one side is sort of waxy, and that's the side that we're using. With the Avery product, they let you know what the back side is, so they print Avery on that. But if your label doesn't, I wouldn't just mark, that it's the back side with a marker or something. And another thing that I use is typically just a blank piece of paper. And what I do is cover that, cover the label backing paper with that, so the iron doesn't get any residue or anything on that. Um, so that's another thing that we'll be using. Now with this project, we're using the sheets are watercolor. I'm using watercolor paper. These sheets are 7 inches by 6 inches, and of course, if you want to work in a landscape mode, then it would be 6 by 7. So you always say the height first, and then the width. So in any case, so now the main thing that we're going to be using here is what I've done earlier. Now I've taken wax paper here, and I've cut out all of these things from these magazines that I like, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay these out on this piece of wax paper, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the gloss medium, and typically, I'll buy this in jugs, and then I'll just pour a little bit at a time in a little plastic cup. Now, you can use a foam brush if you like, if you prefer using that. I think the foam brush applies the medium a little thinner, and you're less likely to see brush strokes. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to coat each side of the image with some of the gloss medium and varnish. Now, if you've already cut your image out, you're going to have a problem with it curling. So you sort of have to be patient, and when you apply it, sort of hold it down for a few seconds. If I apply the medium and then I don't hold it down, it's going to start to curl really bad. So if you hold it down for a few seconds, it takes the paper will absorb the medium, and it's not going to curl instantly. So it's sort of like adding something wet to something that's dry. Immediately it's going to curl up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay all my images out that I cut out, and I'm going to coat each one pretty generously with the medium. Okay, I'm going to let those dry, and I don't know if you can see with the light here, but I'm going to let these dry, and it'll take 20-30 minutes, an hour to dry. When they're dry, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take and turn each one of them upside down. So we have to coat the gloss medium on both sides, and then I'm going to literally coat each backside again with the acrylic medium. I want to be fairly generous with the medium. Now, once I do that, this paper becomes somewhat plastic, and now granted, you're going to have problems more than likely with some of the medium sticking to the wax paper. And what I find is I take a palette knife that you use for painting, and you can kind of work your way under the image and just kind of work your way around, and that will pull that up. So and even if you do get images that peel off, that's fine. That could add to the interest of the photo. So once I have all of those, and what I'll do, I'll spend quite a bit of time just cutting images out. Now, if you had rather do this, what you can do is, instead of cutting the images out first, like I did with these, you'll have a little harder time with them like wanting to curl or buckle. But what you can also do is you can just cut the page out, and instead of cutting the image out or the shape, you can actually just coat the entire sheet. In this case, I coated the entire thing, and if I wanted to, I could take my scissors and I could start cutting after the fact that I put the medium down. So, and so, I accumulate those in piles. These will have a tendency to stick together a little bit. Um, so once I do that, we're going to take our substrate material or backing uh, paper. And in this case, I'm using watercolor paper. It's 140-pound watercolor paper. Now, I'm going to do the same thing with the watercolor paper that I did with the imagery, and I'm going to coat, just one side with the medium. Okay, put a pretty generous coat of the medium on, and then once I get that, I'll move this out of the way so I don't need this anymore. Now this part can be a little tricky because what can happen, some of the images can shift. So what you want to do is you want to play around with the images. Now I think this is a great way to work if you're really undecisive about gluing things down first. So this allows you to reposition the images the way that you want them before you make the commitment of gluing them down. So so what you can do is you can just sort of play around, and don't be worried about lining it up around the edge, because that's not really important, because we can always trim that off later. So what we're going to do is we're going to lay some of these images that I cut out. And now the more images that you have, the more possibilities that you're going to have in creating different different photo montages. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just lay some things out here that I think that I sort of like. I'm not really too concerned with composing too much, because I sort of like the spontaneity of that. And if keeping in mind with the last project, working really quick, sometimes you can get some really interesting effects. So once I'm happy with what I want here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to plug up my iron here. I'm going to turn on another light here to make it a little bit more, so you can see it just a little bit more, and there's not a little less shadows. But I'm going to plug in the iron. And typically I'm going to turn the iron up on high, and I'll wait for it to heat up. And then once that heats up, I'm going to turn it down to about halfway. Now what's going to happen is since this medium, this acrylic gloss medium and varnish is very plastic, when heat's applied to this, it's going to fuse these together. Now the advantage of working this way is you don't have your paper, your paper doesn't start to curl, and you get a really flat surface. So we'll wait till my iron heats up a little bit. I'll give it a little time to heat up here. I noticed Ella is joining us. Hello, Ella. Hello, Lita. And hello, April. So, after I do this, I'll take a little break here, and if anyone has any questions, they can feel free to ask me those. But I think my iron's fairly hot. Now what I'm going to do is turn this down to medium. Now you really want to be careful. If what I would do is I would work on 4 or 5, and I forget what we need. I think it's 5. So work on 7 or 8 at one time, or even 10, and pick 5 that you like. But you want to make sure that that everything's lined up and there's no white space of the watercolor paper showing through. Now, some people in the past have had trouble with these shifting, but if you're really careful and you go to the edge, what you can do is just gently lay this this paper, the backing paper from you know, labels, stickers, or whatever. You want to make sure the waxy side is down first, and I'm going to lay that on top. You know, be very gentle with it so anything doesn't shift. Now I like to lay another sheet of just white typing paper over top of that because I don't want my iron to build up residue from the sheet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start to iron this, and you know, I'm moving fairly slow, and you kind of have to you know, just go about it really slow, and you can feel the paper, you know, getting hot. And you know, I'll take this paper off, and then I'm going to see if this is adhering, and it is. So I'm just going to make doubly sure that that medium is adhering together. Okay, I think that's probably fine there. Let me set my iron out of the way here and turn that off. Now, some people can use tacking irons, and before the sort of the popularity of digital imagery, a tacking iron was basically used for photography, to dry mount a photo to a heavier piece of substrate, just cardboard or whatever. Now you can still find those, and they're really nice because they're sort of triangular shape and they're a little bit smaller. But what we'll do here is, you can see, you know, I worked off the edge quite a bit, so you know, I want to make sure that you know, I don't get shifts. So what I can do after that is just trim up my edges here. Now, I'll also post this on our Facebook page so you can get a closer look at you know, at the image, because the video may not be totally representative of the image, have a little glare or whatever. But as you can see, everything is really extremely flat. Now, a lot with some areas here, it's sort of stuck to the paper, which is fine, and that sort of builds up a little bit of texture. Now, you'll also notice if on these I used a brush, so I can actually see the brush stroke. Now, let's just say that I did this and I'm not really happy with it, and I want to add some more stuff. You always can do that because, you know, reapplying some things. Let's just cut another shape out here and see what I can do by adding another shape on top of this. Now, I like to use these small scissors too, because you can do some really detailed cutting with those, and that. So, you know, once I'm happy, let's just say I want to use this here. Okay. What I'm gonna do is position that there. Be very careful when you're putting your paper, your backing paper from the sticker on top, because you don't want this to shift off. So you want to just gently lay that down, and then lay the other paper down on top of that. Now, I think I turned my iron off, but I think it's still hot enough to fuse the acrylic gloss, medium, and varnish to that. So, and I think that probably did it. So yeah, it fused that together, and I can trim off my edge. Now you can see my photomontage here that I completed, and it's very very flat. There's no wrinkling, so you don't have to worry about applying glue to the back side and then all of a sudden you're getting all of these wrinkles and everything. So